need a lot more doctors like her. Would you please help me welcome Dr. Rubal to the stage?
Hi all, how are you? Good? All right. Well, I wanted to start off by asking how many of us know who Elon Musk is around here? I mean, I would be shocked if I think more than you know who Elon Musk is around here because everyone knows him. He is an icon of our era. And no, he's not a special guest appearance, but he is someone who has a lot of very striking ideas on most subjects. And you know, one of the things that he's absolutely correct about is that we are teetering on the brink of a population collapse. I mean, he says it himself right here. And the data absolutely backs this up. Did you know that the UN estimates there's an 80% chance in this century that our world population is going to peak and then start falling? The reason why this is because when we think about that replacement rate, so that just means the number of live births a woman has to have just to keep a steady state of humans on this planet, it's about 2.1 live births per woman. Does anybody know what we are right now? It's lower in some countries, so that's correct for some places. But overall, globally, on average, it's about 2.2. We're barely eking by, okay? And in 20% of countries already, you can see here, this was pretty staggering, right? From all of these higher numbers back in the 50s and now all the way down on that right side, that collapsing curve, you can see there's ultra-low fertility countries. Again, 1 in 5 countries have population rates, fertility rates of less than 1.4 children born to women. And these are countries you know about. This is China, this is Italy, Spain, and Korea. And so it's pretty terrifying. Soon there's going to be more retired people than there are in the workforce, right? And that's just one of the societal issues that we may be dealing with as a globe. But what's interesting is that 25 years ago, there were 3.1 children live born to every woman. So how did that decline so fast in just a generation, right? Well, in an affluent country like ours, we think that it's due to multiple different factors, okay? First, women are using contraception in huge numbers. 99% of US women have used contraception at some point in their life, and currently 65% of reproductive age women in the US, so 15 to 49 years of age, are on birth control. More women are also delaying childbearing, right? In 1970, you were 21 when you had your first baby. In 2022, you're 27 years old at the time you have your first child. And I mean, I get it. People are first pursuing educational and career opportunities, right? We're waiting longer to settle down with a partner, which is why I'm so glad there's this speed dating thing that you guys can meet someone after this is all done today. They're feeling those financial and societal pressures about children. And not only that, but women are now wholeheartedly in the workforce, right? So once they have a child, they've got to find someone to take care of that child. So this is an issue because as women, we're born with all our eggs. And so that number can go down over time, right? And so if we're delaying childbearing a little bit later, that means that we just have a lower pool of eggs and they might be less high quality eggs, you know, until those eggs go down to the menopause where we think that we don't have any more eggs, which is still average age of 50s, okay? So that's still a long way away. But this can also account for why 1 in 4 couples, when women are at peak fertility, we think of that as in their 20s or early 30s, 1 in 4 couples every month can get pregnant. But this is also why at age 40, 1 in 10 couples can get pregnant each month, okay? So it makes sense. But you know, women aren't the only ones who are involved in this decline in fertility. So next slide is an interesting one. Actually, that's just one showing age of eggs and going down. So the one even after that talks about the rates of decline in sperm in men from Western countries. And in fact, again, you can see there's been a 50% drop in sperm counts over the past 40 years, okay? And so this equates to about 1 in 20 men who are now dealing with reduced fertility. So again, why is this happening? This is all coupled and kind of makes sense that the rates of infertility are rising. So what I tell my patients now is that 1 in 6 couples are going to be experiencing infertility, but I'll tell you what's interesting. 5 years before that, used to tell patients it was 1 in 8. And so can you see that this is really just kind of exponentially increasing and increasing? So lots of people are trying to figure out exactly what's going on and why this is just accelerating at such a rapid pace. And one of the interesting things that we've noticed is that rates of obesity are also increasing kind of around this time frame. And it matters. In fact, 3/4 of all Americans are now considered overweight or obese. And it's not just obesity, but low weight can also impact fertility. Before obesity, we think there are so many different metabolic issues that can occur. There are at least 15 different signaling molecules that the fat cells communicate directly with our reproductive hormones. And we know that it can increase risk of diabetes or it can increase chance of inflammation, which is not good for any of our cells, right? So another reason that people are thinking can really be involved is the risks of all the toxins we may be exposed to in our environment. So those are not only the classic toxins, so things like smoking, which we know is bad for fertility for both men and women, alcohol in higher amounts. But it's interesting that these environmental toxins may be at play too, okay? And so these are things like heavy metals, pesticides, and endocrine disrupting chemicals, which is just a fancy way of saying that these are substances that literally mess with our hormones. And they feel somewhat ubiquitous, right? They're in our food, they're in our water, they're in consumer products that we're using on a daily basis, and even in our air, okay? So what would Elon do? Right? Like, he's publicly proclaimed that, he's doing his part, he said. So the solution to population decline is have more babies, and that I completely agree with. That is the solution, and it makes sense. But he's also a full-throated advocate for assisted reproductive technologies like in vitro fertilization, known as IVF, which is basically when an egg and sperm are combined outside of the body to create an embryo. He supports surrogacy, at least based on the way that he had some of his children per reports. And not only that, but other people on social media that you've probably seen about are really advocating for the use of egg freezing, right, as the solution to all future fertility dilemmas. So what's the issue, right? Isn't IVF pro-life, as people argue, because it helps create more life? It's good. This is the crowd. Yeah, so is this the answer, right, to our population decline and in the face of impending doom? Absolutely not. Not scientifically, not medically, not morally, and not ethically. How can I tell you this? Well, I'm objectively an expert in it. I did a 3-year reproductive endocrinology and infertility fellowship after my 4 years of OBGYN training. I practiced as an IVF doctor. I was involved in some of the very procedures that I'm about to discuss with you. I sat in front of patients, and I grieved with them, and I counseled them, and I talked to them about infertility and about IVF. And I, like the vast majority of my colleagues, truly thought that I was doing a good thing because wanting to have children is a good and ordered desire. But I was absolutely wrong on how to do it. I didn't realize it at the time, clearly. It's interesting, anyone in healthcare out here? Some people don't want to admit it right now, maybe. Okay, I don't blame you. I mean, this decade's been a doozy for healthcare, but being in medical training is very interesting. You're working 80 hours a week. And I've heard people liken it to being different than being educated, because when you're being educated, you're being taught how to reason, how to inquire. But when you're in training, you're being told how to perform, taught how to complete a task. And what we were taught was that ultimately IVF is the best way to address infertility for many different couples. By the way, let me pause, and I think that we all need to remember how painful infertility is and how difficult this path is for people. And it is absolutely true that children have so much dignity and they're a treasure, right? And for any of the people who have undergone or participated or were conceived in any of the things I'm about to mention, you may feel similar to how I do, is that the system that we trusted to guide us and to teach us has failed us. But it is important to name and to discuss these issues because lives are at stake. So what changed for me, right? Why am I standing up here talking to you guys? Well, I realized in a lot of ways my conventional training felt like I was treating episodic issues, like I could override the system, if you will, and put a Band-Aid on something, I mean a fancy Band-Aid, but a Band-Aid nonetheless for this episodic problem of infertility. But really, actually, infertility and other reproductive issues are more like symptoms of chronic conditions, ones that need to be followed and ones that need to be managed and healed over time. I also realized that I was playing God. I was literally involved in life and death for at least thousands of embryos. These are unique, irreplaceable human beings who I knew from my scientific training were created at the moment of fertilization, the moment when that egg is fertilized by sperm. So that's a whole nother talk about the cognitive dissonance that could happen when I knew that from early training, but just mindlessly believed that, no pregnancy happens at implantation into the uterus, But these embryos are simply humans, like you and me, but at their earliest stages of development. They were living, they were dividing and growing on their own in a foreign environment, not even the natural one of their mother's womb. I realized that as much as this desire for children is a really good one, a searing suffering, children are not a right owed to people. In fact, speaking with children who were conceived through IVF really showed me how little I thought about them, about their pain for destroyed siblings or for anonymous donor biological parents. Stephanie Gray Connors is this amazing, she's a very thoughtful apologist, and she's written extensively about this subject. So check out her work if you haven't already. But one of the things she talks about is how children are subjects. Humans are subjects. We are not objects. No one has the right to own or to commodify another human being. And this is very clear from the history we've already heard about with slavery. She raises the point that due to the population shrinking in China that I was just talking about, right, this is due to the decades of their one-child policy and their preference for male children. To date, right now, there is an excess of 35 million more men than women in China right now. That's a lot, right? As such, many men, they long for a wife, but they are not going to practically ever marry. Does this justify then a subset of those same men who go on to human traffic a woman to wed? No, obviously not, right? Because as painful as it is not to have a wife, as good as that desire is, the ends don't justify the means. So not only did I finally understand this moral truth, but I also realized that medically, IVF actually isn't all that it's presumed to be. I saw with my own eyes that nothing in infertility is 100%. The average live birth chance in the US from a woman who undergoes an egg retrieval procedure is 37%. Okay, let me just back up. What is IVF? IVF is when you take eggs from a woman's body after first maturing them with multiple daily fertility medications for a period of weeks. They are then removed by placing a needle through the vagina into each of those ovaries. Those eggs are then suctioned out from the follicles within. They're given to an embryologist outside in a lab, who then may even take a sperm, they'll select it themselves, they'll place that sperm into the egg, and then an embryo is formed, and that embryo is followed for days in a lab. They're kept in incubators, each in their own dish. And then they have different fates, either getting transferred back, or biopsied, or frozen, okay? And so again, average percent chance that that embryo will become a live birth, 37%. Even in the best prognosis patients, the ones that we consider are less than 35 years of age, the women, it's still less than a 50% chance of having a live baby. So that's for the embryos, again, like I said, that become live born. What about all those other embryos that are created through that process? Well, per the most recent national statistics in the US in 2022, we know that about 7 to 11 embryos are created per egg retrieval cycle. And the UK's Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority has compiled data from 1991 all the way to 2022. And what they have reported is that overall, over that 30-year time frame, roughly, there's been about 333,000 live births. But the more interesting question is, well, what's the denominator, right? How many embryos have been created? 6.5 million embryos have been created. And so when you do the math on that, that means that 5% of embryos created were born alive over 3 decades. Put another way, that means that 95% of those embryos were either destroyed, died in the process, or are still frozen. So we know there are millions of embryos frozen without any clear idea of what their fate may be. There are the parents of these embryos who are now having to make these heart-wrenching decisions about what to do when they've completed their family of live-born children and now have the cruel irony of having too many children after their infertility struggles. What are their choices, right? Well, they've got 3. They can either destroy the embryos, they can put them up for adoption, or they can donate them to science, which is really a euphemism for someone experimenting on your embryo before it gets destroyed. The other thing that's an issue with IVF is that it introduces human error, right? Because there are humans handling eggs and sperm and embryos. And I mean, we all may know this, right? With that Alabama Supreme Court case when embryos were accidentally destroyed. And then also from lots of reports that you may have read about in the news when a parent kind of realizes their child doesn't look that much like them, and a year later finally figures out that, oh my goodness, their embryos have been switched with another couple who have been raising their real biological child, right? This is, I pulled up a search and there were multiple stories about this. It's insane. You know, let's talk about the medical risks, right? There actually are an increased risk of medical issues for both mom and child, and this includes for moms an increased risk of life-threatening conditions like sepsis or bleeding so much that you could die from it. You could get C-sections more commonly, increased risk of preterm deliveries, and for the babies, there's an increased risk of birth defects, a 4 times increased risk of stillbirth, and potentially increased risk of autism too. Clearly not perfect. Well, what about for egg freezing, right? That's what everyone's been talking about. How's that technology? Well, we don't know too much about it because only about 16% of people, based on some recent studies, have actually gone back and thawed their eggs and tried to use them to create embryos and then go through that whole process. But many, many women are using it. It was deemed experimental until a decade ago, and once that designation was removed, the numbers of women who are doing egg freezing has increased by 880% in the US alone. So everyone's doing it, okay? It seems like, right? However, with egg freezing, what happens actually? You kind of go through the whole process. You get the fertility medications for weeks, you do the egg retrieval, the eggs are frozen, okay? But then once you're ready to use those eggs, they have to be thawed, where there's a 20% chance they won't survive the thaw. After that, they have to be fertilized by sperm, and there's a 65% chance the egg will be fertilized. And so if we bring that down by a numbers game, if you think 10 eggs get frozen, 8 eggs survive the thaw, 65% chance, 5 embryos result, and not every embryo will grow to mature stage, so that's about 2 embryos, and that's why the live birth rate for women who have thawed their eggs from an egg freezing cycle is still, again, only 39%. Okay, so again, just similar to IVF. And I'm not even talking about the very real, very slippery ethical slope that these technologies introduce. So even now, couples can decide they only want girls or they only want boys, and they can discard the embryos of the undesired sex. People can have their embryos biopsied and screened for the number of chromosomes within and decide they don't want to transfer the ones who are Down syndrome babies or who have sickle cell or who might have an increased risk of disability. They can base this on a screening that is not perfect. I mean, I used to tell people the same thing. This is what we were trained. If there's a PGT tested, which is chromosome screened embryo that is not chromosomally normal, you don't transfer that back. A recent group actually started doing those transfers, and guess what, guys? Out of those allegedly abnormal chromosome embryos, there are now 8 live-born, completely chromosome normal children in the world today. So again, yes, I know, it's amazing, right? But it's heartbreaking because we've discarded so many, and there are so many more millions of embryos again frozen, and the scale of this is staggering, right? I think another crazy thing that is in our world today is human egg farms. Have you guys heard about that story? Those Thai women that were kidnapped against their will, forced to undergo fertility medications, forcibly had egg retrievals done, and then had their eggs sold on the black market. This is happening. There are now private, for-profit companies that offer what they call polygenic embryo scores. And they say that, okay, we screen the whole genome of these embryos at $2,500 per embryo. And we can tell you about multiple genetic conditions. And we can also tell you about that embryo's chance of being born with a higher chance of cancer or of bipolar disease or of obesity. And then you get to decide which embryos get to be transferred out of all those hereditary characteristics. In fact, another company that's currently serving couples for $50,000 for several embryos actually claims that they can select embryos that will increase your children's IQ scores by 6 points. As one of the staffers on there, he actually literally called it liberal eugenics. And I quote, "All we mean by that is that parents should be free and maybe even encouraged to use technology to improve their children's prospects once it's available." Okay? He's saying this on podcasts, okay? By the way, this has already all been done in the animal breeding industry. They've tried this. They tried to create super chickens who are really robust egg producers. I know, it's a great name. And so they were able to do it. They got lots of eggs, but what they didn't realize is that they also were genetically selecting out for super aggressive chickens. And so those chickens killed all the other hens in the pen. I mean, I think there's a lesson to be learned here from this, right? And then there are even wilder realities or almost realities that researchers are hard at work to usher in. This includes gene editing of embryos. This includes 3-parent babies. And this includes the technique called in vitro gametogenesis, okay, or IVG. What that means, gametes are eggs or sperm. Genesis means creation. In vitro means not in the body, right, in a lab. And this is a process that can turn any type of cell into a stem cell, which can then be turned, again, into a sperm or an egg. And these eggs and sperm can be then combined to make an embryo. And all of it, again, done in a lab. So you could just take a swab of a cell, you induce it to become a stem cell, then you program it to become whatever you want. And this has been done already in mice. In fact, there's a Nature article called "The Mice with Two Dads." They took a cell from a male mouse, turned it into an egg, combined it with sperm from another male mouse. Voila, a live mouse embryo. So, or offspring, rather. It's not only eggs and sperm that we have to think about that scientists are hard at work trying to make in labs. It's artificial wombs, too. This is a technology already well into development. And in fact, hundreds of lamb fetuses have been grown for weeks successfully with this. So listen, I don't want to completely blackpill you guys, right? It is depressing. It is shocking, right? There is hope, and there is power in numbers, and it is important to understand what is being ushered in so that you can speak up against it. That's right, please, please. But let's return to my change of heart. I'd had the scales fall off and truly understood that life begins at fertilization. I understood the mass destruction or suspension of life was occurring on an order of millions. I realized that children are humans who are not things, not objects to be manufactured at scale. I realized the kind of eugenics that was occurring by the preferential selection of those we deemed most fit and the dystopian future it's ushering in. I mean, Brave New World, right? Has anyone read that book? That's probably on your curricula, yeah. So what's the alternative? Well, there is one. It's called Restorative Reproductive Medicine, or RRM. And it's a simple approach. If there's a fertility problem, there has to be an underlying reason. Identifying and hopefully correcting those underlying reasons will then resolve and restore reproductive health. Put another way, restorative reproductive medicine is a scientific approach to cooperate and restore our normal physiology and anatomy, as opposed to methods that are going to circumvent or destroy or suppress it. It's an effective, it's an ethical, and it's an affordable alternative to things like IVF for couples who are struggling with infertility, or actually for women with a whole host of other GYN conditions. And so restorative reproductive medicine is used in both men and women using both medical and surgical methods. So why does this need its own title, right? Doesn't this just sound like good medicine? One would think so, but even speaking from my own experience, once I started delving into this field, I felt like I was uncovering so many new treatments that I could apply to people. And in fact, studies show that only 6% of OBGYNs and family medicine doctors know about one of the most basic parts of restorative reproductive medicine, which is fertility awareness-based methods, or FABMs. Basically, what that relies upon is the fact that as a woman has her cycle and she's having hormones build in preparation for the egg to be released, and then hormones after, but when the egg has been released, what can happen is those hormones induce different signs that we can track physically. And so this can be an explanation for why women, if you're having pain in middle of your cycle, well, it's actually your egg releasing. It's called Mittelschmerz. Or if you have different GI and appetite changes before your period begins, it's because of this decline in hormones. Or even because of the power of hormones and the brain connection and the hormones receptors in the brains, why sometimes of the month we are more focused, we're better at reading maps, there's better visual spatial abilities, and at other times we're much more irritable and fatigued potentially, okay? Hormones are powerful things. I mean, when women finally understand this, everyone says how empowering it is and how they wish they had known about it sooner. And so how does restorative reproductive medicine work for fertility? Just basics is number one, we try to identify the issue. And this is similar to conventional REI in the sense that you look at all the organs, but you do it in a much deeper way. We're trying to figure out the connections. We know that all the organs exist together, and so there's connections with the gut and the brain and the rheumatologic system and the immune system. We then, once we identify any imbalances, we correct those. We help if there's any immunologic or antibacterial interventions that need to be done. And then you allow conception to occur naturally for even up to another year because you've, again, restored everything to its optimal function. So I just want to, that sounds very esoteric, right? So I just wanted to practically compare for you what that means for conventional versus restorative reproductive medicine, okay? And so one example, I have a woman who is dealing with painful periods, right? So in that woman, you go to a conventional doctor. Do you guys know what they do? Yeah, you get put on birth control, right? Of course, that's it. You get put on birth control, maybe even continuously. You don't even get a break. It's only active pills all the time, no period. Restorative reproductive medicine approach, we get an ultrasound to see, is there a structural cause? Is there something in the uterus or in the ovary that's causing this pain? Is it possible there could be an infection or inflammation that we could treat and help? Is there holistic changes we can discuss, like an anti-inflammatory diet or even supplements that can help, or breathing techniques for acute pain episodes? And in severe cases or with infertility, we can talk about even doing surgery to assess for endometriosis and hopefully treat it. Okay, next example. A woman with irregular periods. Conventional, if you're not trying to conceive, and even I've seen when people are trying to get pregnant, they get put on, you guessed it, birth control. It's so sad. I've had patients come in where they're like, yeah, I haven't been having regular periods, and I got put on birth control pills for 3 months by my OBGYN doctor, which is obviously they're not going to get pregnant in that way. Restorative reproductive medicine approach, you figure out and do a really deep dive of why their hormones are so imbalanced that they aren't ovulating. There are at least 5 or 6 different causes. You then try to correct those causes using lifestyle interventions, using nutritional strategies, using supplements actually can be very effective, and then using really tailored pharmaceuticals potentially to help them restore their ovulation. I mean, I could go on and on, but the same theme emerges, right? A cursory approach followed by aggressive pharmaceuticals or procedures in the conventional system, or a root cause approach that's then accompanied by holistic changes to heal that issue, hopefully, so that person can get pregnant or feel better on their own, okay? And so when you think about restorative reproductive medicine, the next big question is, well, is it as effective as IVF? And in fact, the studies show that they are equivalent. It's a hard thing to measure because IVF, again, treats infertility as episodic, as, okay, this is one issue. And so live birth rates are expressed through egg retrieval procedures, whereas with restorative reproductive medicine, it's expressed as a function of time, right? That a conception is going to occur over a period of time. But there have been multiple studies showing that the cumulative live birth rate for restorative reproductive medicine is 27 to 66% over 2 years' time. And I just told you, remember? IVF, a 37% chance of live birth for an intended egg retrieval cycle. So I think that we can see that there is a really good option out there, but that many people do not know about, okay? However, by working with your body's natural reproductive rhythms, restorative reproductive medicine can lead to healthier pregnancies, healthier moms, and healthier babies, okay? I wanted to leave you also with 3 actionable items that all of you could be implementing right now just to make sure you have the most optimized fertility possible. So for everyone, number 1, you are what you eat. You do want to, maha for days, right? You do want to limit your processed foods. You do want to try to eat organic when you can because it decreases your pesticide load by at least 3/4, believe it or not. Number 2, you want to make sure your gut's working well because it is so important. It's where your immune system mainly resides in many ways. 70% of the immune system's in the gut. It's part of your detoxification pathways. Number 3, you want to find your meaning and give yourself grace. This world is so stressful. Stress can impact our hormones too. So you're doing the right thing. You're here. You're going to be fighting for these children and these embryos, right? And for women, check out fertility awareness-based methods, I would say, is really wonderful. For men, don't use testosterone or anabolic steroids if you're lifting, because those, I know, sorry, man, but because that can actually suppress your sperm counts and that can be permanent, okay? So yes, Elon is a genius, but he also represents the perfect example of heedlessly and indiscriminately following human-derived technology, which is simply a tool that can be used for good or for evil. He epitomizes the consumerist mentality of acquiring commodities. But who among here knows that embryos are not a commodity? Yeah, right? Embryos are not to be manufactured. And so You are the future, and we want a society that protects the most vulnerable, and embryos are the most vulnerable and youngest among us. Thank you.